Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Awesome TVN. And as you can tell from the title, this one is way different than what the ones I normally do. Completely different actually, because so far all I've done is video games. So anything that's not a video game will be different. But it's something that I'm really excited to make, and it's something I've been wanting to make for a while actually. Ever since I started the channel back up, this is something I had in mind of what I wanted to do. And I'm actually going to pull this in a bit closer so you can hear me a bit better. But this is one of the original things that I want to do. And my appearance, it's all off. Like extra acne, the normal amount, sunburned face. I went on a float trip with my church, so like that was 4 days ago, and I'm still burning up from it. But with this, it's just a video I've wanted to make for a while. So I mean, you've listened to the preamble, so I'm gonna try to get into this as soon as I can. But there are some things I need to touch on before we can begin. Okay, so first thing I want to touch on, this isn't a video just for Christians. Now, it is not a Christian fact that the kingdom of Judah existed. It's not a Christian fact that these kings existed, because most of these kings, ironically enough, not ironically, but interestingly enough, actually can be cross-referenced with Sumerian kings at the time and things that they had written about them. And we have the Sumerian text too to collaborate what we have with the Bible text, which effectively, because most of this information comes from Samuel King's Chronicles, so we could effectively consider those Jewish texts. What's in the Jewish texts is simultaneously collaborated with the Sumerian texts, and even towards the end, the Babylonian texts, which is just a fact that shows that this, you could consider this a history book. But if you do want to look at this for spiritual reasons, to get to know more about the Bible, more about the history of the kingdom, then yeah, I mean, it works either way. So the second thing I want to get out of the way is the authority of this. So, like I said, most of this information is coming from the Bible, so I want to quickly touch on the authority of the Bible in this. So, whether you're Christian or not, there are two ways to look at it. The Christian way of looking at it is we have a God who is just, who cares about us, and who wants us to know him. So based off of those characteristics of God, we can assume that he's given us his word so that we can know about him. Paul wrote that all scripture is breathed out by God and is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. That's 2 Timothy 3:16. So it's something where as a Christian you can trust it. And then even as someone who isn't Christian, or maybe agnostic, atheist, or even some entirely different religion, what you can do is you can look at this, and maybe even you don't want to look at it as a whole thing. I mean, as a whole thing, there are the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have manuscripts that date back, that go back to the original manuscripts and prove that that's like over 90% accurate over 2,000 years, which is insane. But even like I was saying, with this era that we're working on, the facts in here can be cross-referenced with facts of enemy kingdoms even. So with that, you can have some amount of faith and trust that what I've gathered from the Bible can be trusted. And then finally, before we start, I just want to say I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm some nerdy 18-year-old who is who's going into engineering, not even history or or theology. It's just something I've wanted to make, and it didn't work. I didn't plan on this, but my birthday's on a Sunday, so I'm gonna upload this then, and it'll all work out pretty cool. So, with no further ado, let's actually get into the timeline. So, long time ago, not in a galaxy far, far away. This was in our galaxy, on our planet, in a modern-day Middle East. There was a tribe of Judah, and it was a group of people who had fled from Egypt, and it grew larger and larger and larger, and had entered this so-called promised land that God had promised his great-grandfather Abraham, the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of the tribe, Abraham. So they live in this area, and they live under the reign of God. God essentially is their king in the beginning. And if they ever drift away, or if they're taken over by other kingdoms, what happens is God will send a judge to judge over Israel in his stead. Kind of like a steward. You can think like the steward of Gondor, except they actually do what they're told for the most part. There are some who go off. There's some who do really good. There's some who do really bad. You've all probably heard the story of Samson. If you haven't, no shame, but just that's a pretty popular one that people talk about. He was a judge. He wasn't a king, but he was kind of the big boss in charge, and he just did the judges did their best to execute God's will. Now, the person who's commonly considered the last judge is Samuel, which in that was the first thing I had learned in this whole process, because I thought Samuel was just a prophet. I didn't realize that he by most was considered a judge as well. So, because you'll see Samuel plays a huge role, I do want to go in a little bit into his backstory. So Samuel's mom couldn't have kids. So she went and she prayed at the temple. And there's actually this funny story of the high priest at the time, Eli, being like, "Oh, woman, you're drunk," like because she was weeping. She was so sorrowful. She was repentful. So yeah, Eli comes in like, "Oh, you're drunk. You don't be drunk at the temple. Get out of here, scram!" I almost imagine it's like the old man, "Get off my lawn. Get out of here." So she ends up like, "No, I'm not drunk. I'm just sad, and I'm begging God to give me a son." And eventually, God answered her prayers, and because of that, she devoted Samuel to the church and actually went and brought him back to the temple to learn to worship God and to be a priest for him. And like I've said before, he ends up becoming a judge and a judge and a prophet. Wait, real quick, let me double check something because I don't want to say this and then not be true. Okay, so I looked it up and this is correct, and I remember this in the Bible at the part, but the reason Samuel's even named Samuel is because Samuel in Hebrew means God heard. So God heard his mother's prayers and her begging him for a child, and he heard and he answered. And it's just a great story of just someone earnestly coming to God and pleading with him, and they actually get the thing that they wanted. So with that, Samuel is raised in the temple. There's this whole story about him, his first time talking to God, and he thinks that Eli's talking like three different times, and finally Eli figures it out. He's like, next time you hear it, say, "I'm here, Lord. Tell me what you need." Something along those lines. I suck at getting exact word to word. And pretty much what happens is God prophesies through Samuel that Eli's sons, because Eli's sons at the time were not doing good. They just there were vast corruption within it. It's like, "Oh yeah, if you got to bring tips for the priest. You gotta tip us as we sacrifice." Or like they get like take food that they weren't supposed to eat from the temple. Just all this bad things. And through Samuel, God prophesies, "Yep, that's not gonna happen anymore." So Samuel goes, and he didn't actually want to tell Eli because it didn't fare well for him. It wasn't good news, and Eli's like, "Hey, God told you this. Like, I'm not gonna be mad at you. Like, just tell me. I need to know." Sam told him, and he wasn't happy, obviously, but he accepted God's judgment. So what ends up happening is the Israelites go to war against the Philistines, and the king at the time has not the king, but like the people at the time have the grand idea, "Oh, let's go parade the ark in front," because the ark is what they considered held God's presence, and at the time it did, at least a portion of it. So they went and brought it up front, and the Philistines murdered the two priests, which were Eli's two sons, and stole the ark. So didn't work out too well. There's this whole funny aside where the Philistines just bring the ark from city to city, and every city they bring it to is just ravaged with disease and natural disasters. They're like, "Oh no, we gotta move it," and then they move it, and then the next city's screwed. It's like 3 or 4 cities before they're finally like, yeah, no, take it back, and they like brought like this like like cart of goodies with it, like, "Oh, we're sorry, just please stop destroying our cities." Just a wild story. So some time passes, and sorry. So some time passes, and Samuel's considered a really good judge. He kind of does what God wants him to. Now, where things go wrong is Sam tends to go into the same mistake that Eli made, and he has his sons be judges as well, and they don't do. They're not judges, but priests and stuff, and they kind of follow the same route as Eli's son. They're not good judges. They're kind of corrupt, and because there's an uproar within the kingdom of Judah, at this time Israel. Now, because of this, that's how we're actually going to get into what this whole video is about. What, like this feels like 5 minutes in. I'm not doing good on time. This is gonna be such a long video, but I'm nerding out and I'm having a blast. So the people all get together and they're like, we want a king, we want a king. Oh, I'm hitting that. So they're all getting mad. They tell Sam, we want a king, we want a king. So Sam prays to God, and God's like, well, if they want a king, give them a king. It's not gonna work out good for them, but yeah. So Samuel tells them like, hey, a king, he's gonna draft your kids, make them go to war. He's gonna make them work for him. Like it's not gonna be good for you guys. But they wouldn't listen. They wanted a king because it was just trendy at the time. All the neighbor kingdoms have kings. We want a king as well. Why can't we have a king? So they get a king, and the king they chose is what you'd think a king would look like. He was strong, tall. He had good battle tactics, a good fighter. His name was Saul. You've probably heard of him and in the escapades with his successor, but it's not a good time. So now that there's a king, there's no more need for a judge. So Samuel announces his retirement. He actually has like this huge speech and he retires. He I don't know that I don't think there was golf at this time, or if there was, it was only in Scotland. So I don't know what ancient Israelites did when they retired, but something along the lines of Hebrew golf. That's what I'll call it. He went to go play Hebrew golf. So very soon after this, Saul does a bunch of things that God communicates with him to not do, and he does them anyways. So through this, God rejects Saul. The first king of Israel and Judah gets rejected by the God who put him in power. And there is a whole other segment of based off the providence of God that I'm not going to get into right now. But God knew this would happen, but he knew that it had to happen for better things to go. And the providence of God is a different topic that if you guys want to hear me talk about Bible things again, which I'm not educated to do at all, I will. I had fun researching this, so I can do that, but that's not on the list right now. So I didn't write any examples down of what Saul did specifically, but I do know a couple off the top of my head, and the big one that comes to mind is there was this kingdom, and they were encroaching on the territory of God, and God tells Saul, wipe them all out, don't bring anything home. Like, if you do, it's gonna bite you in the butt later on. So Saul goes and he has all the men of Israel pick up their weapons for war, and they join him. And when they get there, it's bloody, but the Israelites win. And Saul doesn't take out everything. He doesn't put everything to destruction. He saved the best of the best. He even let the king live. And the reason that I remember this so specifically is the king's name was Agag, if I remember correctly. And there's a paternal link between Agag and Haman in the book of Esther, which Haman is kind of considered the original Hitler because he tried to set up a plot to kill all the Jews. So because Saul didn't listen to God like 1,000 years before, 1,000 years later, the descendant of the guy who Saul should have killed goes and almost annihilates the entire Jewish race. So just crazy things like that. And there's so many connections like that in the Bible that I've realized through this research project. And that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed, is just the amount of things that I've learned through this. So God at this point rejected Saul. He doesn't want Saul anymore. It's just not, Saul's not the good king that they need. So what happens is God calls on Samuel to come out of playing Hebrew golf. I don't know what his I don't know what his handicap was at that point, but I don't know. Sam was ready though, and says, "Hey, I need you to go to the farm of Jesse, a guy named Jesse, not female Jesse, and one of Jesse's sons is going to be the next anointed king." So what ends up happening is Sam goes there, not Saul. And he's looking through and he's like, oh, look at this. The oldest son. Huge dude, like, kind of looks pretty smart, good fighter. He'll be a great king. And God says, no, you're judging people by the outside, but I judge by the inside. So Sam goes through all the sons of Jesse and ends up, he goes through all of them and it's like, oh, there's no more. Who is it? So he asks Jesse, like, oh, do you have more sons? Or I thought you said this was all of them. They're like, oh, well, the youngest David's out in the field. So he's like, go get David. And they look at David, and he's the one. He's the one who God has chosen. And many times in the Bible, it even says that David was a man after God's own heart. He's very highly looked upon within biblical cultures as an ideal king. Like King Arthur. I mean, King Arthur in effect is a character archetype of King David, the good king. So David's anointed, and pretty soon after this, one of the most famous Bible stories takes place of David and Goliath. Everyone knows it. Little David gets his bows and his little rocks in a sling, and right, chair almost broke on me. Just gets Goliath right in the head. Goliath falls over, and the day's won. The part that isn't as well known, because most people hear this as kids, is that David actually takes this Goliath's own sword, which is like ginormous, and beheads him with it. So that's cool. At least to my teenage boy brain. So after this, David ends up working for Saul. Saul's like, you're a pretty cool dude, and hires him. And at first, things are all good. David is excellent musician, and it soothes Saul. David's also an excellent general and warrior, so great in David's army. But pretty soon after, Saul's jealousy starts to show, because there's this one scene where they come back from war, and it says that there's women singing in the streets, "Oh yeah, Saul, he's killed his thousands. But David, he's killed his tens of thousands." And it's just too much. It sends Saul over the board. He can't deal with it. So there's a certain point where he decides that he's going to kill David, which is very depressing for David. And there's so much about David. I feel bad doing this, but I am going to have to cut some of his information short, because effectively he has like 3 books of the Bible that talk all about him. And I don't want this video to be 20 million years long, and I also don't want half the video to be devoted to one king when there's like 20 kings or something like that we have to get through. I mean, I have 5 papers, and we're not even done with the first one. The other ones will go by quicker, but it's like, geez. But it is really sad, going back after my little tangent, because David's best friend was Jonathan. Like, it's the relationship between David and Jonathan is like the ideal relationship of brotherly love. So Jonathan actually helps him flee from his dad, and over the course of many years, David flees, Saul catches up. There's even one occasion where Saul goes to the bathroom in a cave that David and all of his warriors were hiding in, but David says that it's not man's position to strike down the anointed of God, because even though David's been anointed king, Saul was too. So David even goes in the cave, sneaks up behind Saul, cuts off a little shred of his cloak, and then as Saul's outside, he's like, "Hey, Saul, got your cloak. I could have killed you, but I'm better than that." But not like that, not in a prideful way. It's more of in an honoring and respecting way, not the way I said it. So from there, eventually Saul dies at the hands of the Philistines, I believe, and unfortunately at the time too, Jonathan does as well. So it is this very melancholy thing where, sure, David's happy that he doesn't have to be on the run anymore, but he did like Saul before Saul kind of went crazy and wanted to try to kill him. And then also, Jonathan was like his best friend. It's like the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan for you fellow Star Wars nerds before Anakin turned to the dark side. And it's just this really melancholy situation. But with that, David's now king. And David is considered one of the greatest kings. There's very few flaws that he has. I mean, if you guys know this story of Bathsheba, something like that, that's the big no that he did. But while he was there, the territory grew to, I think that's when it was at its peak. If it wasn't at its peak, it was under his successor Solomon. But yeah, David, best king. If that's all you take away, good King David. On to Solomon. Never mind, we're not done with David, because I looked at my list and realized we forgot something. So David had a lot of kids. 3 of them were named Ammon, Tamar, and Absalom. I think that's how you pronounce it. So Ammon, real shady dude, and thought his sister was beautiful and wanted to sleep with her. Weird. And his sister is Tamar. And he does some shady crap to get this to happen, but he does it. Sorry, my door opened out of nowhere and it scared the crap out of me. So he does some shady crap and he does it. And after this happens, the sister goes through a mourning period and then tries to convince Ammon to marry her because she figures, well, I mean, can't get any worse. And in this time, they viewed virginity as like the do all be all. If you were an unmarried woman who lost it, that was kind of it for you. And Ammon refused. So Absalom goes and kills him, and kills a bunch of the other guys too. David's told that Absalom kills all of them. So Ammon's dead. Absalom flees. He comes back for a little bit, and then he goes away again, and he actually tries to revolt against his dad. So Absalom dies, and with that, David's the king once more, and David's the king for a while. Now, there's a woman named Bathsheba, the one who David unrighteously slept with, and he's the second kid between the two of them because the first one died. And David promises that Solomon will be the next king. So with that, let's now get into Solomon. So Solomon, right when he's about to take reign, all of a sudden, one of his other siblings, oh geez, Adonijah, 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 claims the throne. He's like, oh, I'm king now. So the same prophet that initially rebuked David for what he did with Bathsheba and her husband comes back and is like, hey, you promised that Solomon would be king. David's like, you're right, I did. So they go through all that drama, and Solomon is anointed the king. And then very soon after, David, the first good king of Israel, is the new king. And with that, one paper done. It should go quicker, don't worry. Now, Solomon's actually known for quite a few different things. One of his big things is the dream, and in this dream, God comes to him and says, you can have whatever you want. And instead of saying for something worldly like wealth or a long life or control of the tri-state area, as Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz would put it, he instead asks for wisdom, and a godly wisdom too. And pretty much God says, well, since you've asked for this, I'll give you the other things too. He gave him money, he gave him a long life, he gave him a great army. And because of this, he's well renowned throughout everything. So there's this incident that he's also known for where two women, both of them prostitutes, come into him and they're both claiming custody of a child. And every time I read this, it's like, how stupid was the one woman whose baby was dead? Because I feel so bad laughing about this because this is such a sad situation. They can't afford food, so one of the women says, "Hey, we need to eat tonight, so let's eat your baby, and then we'll eat my baby tomorrow." And then the next day comes around, and after they've eaten the one baby, and then they won't eat the other one. It's like, well, I mean, you kind of saw that coming. Like that's why it's yours first, not mine. But they both claim custody of the child. So they both make their case, and then Solomon comes and he says, you know what? I know it's fair. We'll split it down the middle. Each of you get half the baby. And then obviously the one who's like, no, she can have it, is the mother. And I say obviously, but this is just a trope that we've grown to know because of this instance. It's at the time like revolutionary. It's just truly shows the wisdom that he was gifted. So he also at this time, the Queen of Sheba, which was a kingdom in Africa, comes up to visit him because he's a rich, smart dude. Let's go check him out. And yeah, she's like, Dad, yeah, he's smart. And she brought money, and it was just a cool little story. And then at this time, the big thing that he's known in Jewish traditions is for construction. He built the castle of the kings of Judah. But then he also went and constructed the temple. At this time, this is the best edition of the temple. It gets rebuilt a couple times, but none of the times is it up to the standard of this original one. This is when it's at its peak. Forgot to mention it initially, but there's also the fun fact that he had over 700 wives and a lot of concubines. he was a player, and that's one of the reasons why he ended up moving away from God. And they actually led him to make altars for all the religions that they came from, because one of them was Egyptian, and the other one just came from from everywhere. But yeah, it didn't work out well for him. He probably shouldn't have had all those women. So then Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Solomon dies, Rehoboam's king. Rehoboam's presented with an option. All the workers come to him. Hey, Rehoboam, we work too hard. We want more breaks. So Solomon goes and he's like, should I lessen the load on these people? He takes counsel with all of Solomon's counselors, all the elders, and they say, yeah, we can make do with them working less, and I think that's the smart thing to do. And he doesn't like that, so he goes to all of his drinking buddies, like it says like all the young foolish men, and it's like, yeah, I just imagine they're like his drinking buddies or something, and they go, oh no, make him work harder, torture him, whip him. Just like all this awful advice, just treat them like crap. And he goes with the young guy's advice, and because of this, the kingdom of Israel does not like him. So there's this man named not Jehu. Oh, Jeroboam. I didn't have that written down. I remembered that. Jeroboam goes and he leads a revolt and takes out the whole northern half of the kingdom. So the kingdom split in two. So if this video does well, I can make a second video of what happens to the northern kingdom, but our focus is on the southern kingdom because that's the line of Judah, which is what the video is titled. So pretty soon after this, they're actually invaded by Egypt. Not a good time. And then also there's the construction of the high places, because Rehoboam does move away from God. There's this interesting thing where the position that Israel and Judah were originally given was gifted to by God. So if they move away from God, bad things happen. But when they worship God, not necessarily good things happen, but not bad things happen. And that can be seen throughout this, because most bad things happen to the bad kings. That kind of the easiest way to put it. So, Rehoboam, not good guy, he constructed the high places. And he lost half the kingdom because of it. Not because of it, but like he did lose half the kingdom. So then his son actually goes by two different names, and it's either Abijah or Abijam. And with this guy, there is actually a war with Israel to the north. So the kingdom that was originally one, war breaks out between the two. So initially, this actually works out really good for Abijam. I'm going to use Abijam because I like saying that. And they did conquer quite a few cities of Israel. But like always, he dies. And he wasn't good. He led the people of Israel away from God and just didn't do. I mean, Judah, not Israel. Just not a good guy. He died. His son, on the other hand, King Asa, was a good guy. He did his best to bring the people back to God, to say, hey, all those high places and all the altars for foreign gods that these past two kings have set up, don't listen to them. Like, come back to the God of Judah, the God of Israel, that got you this place originally, that loves you and cares for you. Just come back to him. And there is this little bit that I wrote that they did go to war with Ethiopia at that time, which is just funny that kind of like areas that we know today, like these people were going to war with them. And at the time, this was about 3,000 years ago. And it's just neat. I'm a history buff, so I just find that cool. And yeah, I'll start saying times because I have those written down, but I'll probably have them on screen too. So then in about 870 BC, Asa died and his son Jehoshaphat reigned. And his son was also just as good as him. He actually ended up making peace with Israel. And with that, boom. And yeah, he kind of kept the good standing that Asa kind of got within Judah. So that was a good thing. And then the good things ended. So now we have King Jehoram, I think is his name. I mean, I know that's the king. It's the pronunciation that I don't know. So, right off the bat, he doesn't do good. He marries the daughter of Ahab, who was the king of Israel at the time. And Israel doesn't really ever turn back to God, at least to some big extent. So, anytime something like this happens where they take traits from Israel, it's never for the best. It's long gone. And pretty much he marries the daughter of Ahab, and he takes all the traits of Israel, starts worshiping foreign gods, and just not abiding in the law of God that God gifted to them. And because of this, a section of Judah, which was called Edom, revolted. And there's actually a whole different people that form out of this, the Edomites, which they existed inside of the kingdom, but now they're their own thing. On my paper, I just have written fun death. So let me look up what I mean by that, because I did this research a while back. All right, this was a fun death. I'm just going to read this word for word. 2 Chronicles 21, verses 18 through 19, 18 and 19. And after all this, the Lord struck him in his bowels with an incurable disease. In the course of time, at the end of 2 years, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great agony. His people made no fire in his honor, like the fires made for his father. No one loved him. He just crapped his pants to death. And everyone's like, he sucked. Good riddance. Okay, so Jehoram's dead. His son, Ahaziah, I think, is now in charge at 842 BC. Very quickly, King Ahaziah makes an alliance with Israel, and pretty much right after goes to war with Syria. And he dies quick. He is only in power for 1 year. And there is a lot of interesting events that conspire right after this, because his wife, Athaliah, is the only queen of Israel. Not the only queen, but the only ruling queen. Because obviously the kings married queens, and that's how it works. But she was the only one to rule. And whenever she takes power, she instantly goes on a murderous rampage and tries to kill everyone in the ruling family. But Athaliah's sister ended up saving one of the sons of Jehoram, who is named Joash. So saves him, pulls him away, and she's assisted by Jehoiada, who's the high priest at the time, who helps protect this kid and raise him. And this state ends up going for about 6 years. Now, towards the end, Jehoiada leads an entire revolution against the queen at the time. She's dead. And then with her dead, King Joash is able to reign. So, King Joash begins what I call the libertarian kings, where he did good, but he didn't enforce good. So, he repaired the temple, he did peace with the Syrians. So, King Joash, like I said, he repaired the temple because at this time it was in disarray from the bad kings, Athaliah, Azariah, Jehoram, blah. And what ends up happening is he does make peace with Syria. Now, he does do some not good things towards the end. Remember that Jehoiada guy that kind of helped put him into power, the high priest? He had a son named Zechariah. Now, if you're familiar with the Bible, it's not the Zechariah that wrote the book Zechariah. Different Zechariah. But Zechariah comes and says some things like, hey, you need, you've repaired the temple, which is good, but you need to take down the high places, which is the high places to other gods. And he gets mad and kills Zechariah, which is just insane because this is the son of the guy who gave him power. You're like, these two should be best friends. Not the case. So with that's why he's considered a mixed king, not overwhelmingly good, not overwhelmingly bad. Leans more towards the good. That's going to be the same for the next 4, next 3, this one included. So he dies, and then his son reigns. Amaziah. Amaziah. I don't know. Remember the area of Edom that broke off a bit ago? He goes to war against them. So he fought the Edomites, and eventually the king himself was actually captured by Israel to the north. Not even the people he was fighting. He did win against the Edomites, though. So he was captured, and while he was captured, he ended up dying, and his son Uzziah reigned. Uzziah was considered actually really good at the beginning. But what ended up happening is he got really prideful, went to the temple, and wanted to do the sacrifice himself. Didn't want to go through a priest, just let me do it. And in the moment, what ended up happening is he became a leper on the temple steps. And at the time, leprosy was an incurable disease. If you got over it, it was considered a divine act. So there were steps that the priest had to take, and he was considered a leper for the rest of his days. So because Uzziah was a leper, he actually couldn't reign. but he was still king. So there's actually this like, what is it, 11 years where his son's reigning, but he's still alive. So son Jotham was king. Not too much happens that is new during his reign. It's just kind of the same old of what Uzziah did, of what Amaziah did, of what Joash did. Like these four kings are all very similar. But with the death of Uzziah and then with the death of Jotham, King Ahaz
Ahaz.
reigns. Ahaz, not good guy, bad guy. So this is one of the things that actually inspired me to make this. Is I was laughing because I was like, oh yeah, the king was pretty good, and then it goes to the next king. Yeah, Ahaz not good, man. He did not walk in the ways of the Lord. That's how they kind of specify bad king. He burned his son as an offering to a foreign god, and it's like, yeah, that kind of makes someone a pretty bad dude. And at this time, once again, I think this is like the second or third time the kingdom goes to war with Syria. Syria pretty much just like sucker punches them their entire existence. And that's also why you can cross reference some of the records of Chronicles, Kings, and Samuel with the records of Syria because they were mortal enemies. So with the death of Ahaz, we actually have one of our first just like considered all good kings. So real quick, this is me recording like a couple days later. I don't say Hezekiah till the very end. This is King Hezekiah. I don't know why I didn't say it. I just didn't. So back to the video in a long time. So he was really good. Brought most of the kingdom back to God. It was all about glorifying God and what he did. He was captured by Assyria at one point, but towards the end of his life, what he did is he got really sick and he searched for a prophet to see how much longer in his life he had. And the prophet was like, you're not going to get over this disease. This disease will kill you. So best to make amends. And Hezekiah was devastated. And once again, similar to Samuel's mom, he prayed and implored God to give him extra time. Now, there's an interesting thing that happened because God does, I believe it's 20 other years. God gives him the extra life. He lets him get over the sickness and live for 20 more years. But in that 20 years, the next king was born. And this next king is regarded as one of the worst kings in the entire history. So if God was stuck with, not stuck, because God knew that Hezekiah would ask and he knew that he would change it. But if Hezekiah hadn't asked and just gone with the original plan, this worst king wouldn't have been born. It's just an interesting fact that I like to think about. So, as I kind of referenced, Hezekiah died. Manasseh is now alive. Manasseh, the Bible says that he undid all the good things that Hezekiah did. And oddly enough, we're back to the child sacrifice. I don't know what they loved so much about burning their sons at the altar, but they were all for it. And towards the end of his life, he actually did repent of it. Now, it's unclear whether or not he was saved because of this repentance, but towards the end, he did feel sorry for what he did. So Manasseh does die, and his son Ammon reigns. Not the Ammon that was David's son, because this is like 300 years later, 350 years later. And also, this Ammon only has one M. The other Ammon had two. Same sins as his father, maybe not to such an insane degree, but he didn't repent at the end of his life. And he was actually so hated by the people that worked for him that his servants were the ones that ended up killing him. They were on like an outing, and the servants were like, "We hate this guy." They killed him. But then, you know, even if you don't like the king, like Trump Biden, you either love one, hate one, or hate one, love one. Imagine the one that you hate got killed. You would, part of you would be happy. It's like, he's dead. Fine. Not happy, but like, think that it was necessary. But you would still be mad, like, especially if that was the one in office. It's like, yeah, I didn't like that guy, but he was our president. We got to kill you now. So the citizens revolt and kill all the servants that had killed Ammon. And with that, through that, they were going to kill his son as well, the servants. But because the citizens killed the servants, the son survived. And the son is Josiah, who I'm sure many of you heard of. Now, Josiah was a great king. Very soon off the bat, he started restoring the temple. In the process, found the book of law and had Israel obey it, listen to it. And it says that he was a man of David's heart, which, if you keep in mind, David was a man with a heart like God's, a man of God's own heart. So, there's a different step in between, but like Josiah is a great king. and he ends up praying to God to to delay the inevitable destruction of Judah. And God says he's not going to delay it, but Josiah won't be the one who's king when it falls, because we are getting towards the end of this. And he ends up dying trying to win over the favor of the Syrians by trying to capture the Pharaoh Necho. Doesn't work out, and he's killed with a spear through the chest, which is just, it's sad, because if you read what he did, he truly did so much to try to fix the kingdom of Judah, and he got a lot done, and great king overall. So after Josiah, there is Jehoahaz. No, Jehoahaz. 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 I think that's it. And right off the bat, he's actually captured. It doesn't have that long of a reign. He's captured by the same pharaoh that killed his dad, Necho. And pretty much what happens is, once he's captured, the pharaoh's like, okay, I'll let you go back, but you're going to be a vassal state for me. If you don't know what a vassal state means, it's like, technically you're not part of my country, but you do everything I say. And he's like, no. So he's not allowed to be king. So then, pretty much, the Pharaoh Necho goes and says, okay, Josiah's sons, who will be my servant? And one of them goes, I will. He's like, okay, I'm changing your name. You're Jehoiakim now. He's like, okay. So he changes his name, and he works for the Pharaoh. And for a little bit, he's like, I'm going to go fight Babylon, because at this time, Babylon's really cranking it up. They're conquering everything. And very quickly, he's brought in chains to Babylon. Didn't work out well for him. So then Jehoiakim ends up dying, and Jehoiachin,
Jehoiakim,
a little bit different, is now in charge, and he is instantly brought in chains to Babylon. So that didn't work out well. And then Zedekiah, who is the final king, we made it, of Israel, goes and tries to have a final battle against Babylon, of which is unsuccessful. And I'm reading this now, but he broke an oath that he took in God's name. And with the death of Zedekiah, the entire kingdom of Judah is no longer a sovereign state, therefore it's not really a kingdom. So with that, the video is over. So I just want to say thanks. If you are getting to the outro, congratulations. I have no clue how long this video is. I'm about to go get into editing. No way I'm finishing it tonight. I got half an hour before I'm going to bed. It ain't getting done. I can promise you that. But it's just been something I've been wanting to make, and just thank you for listening to it. I had fun making it. So even if this doesn't get any views, you may see other things. This can be my pet project. I mean, nothing on this channel gets that many views, but I do it for fun. So, just thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you caught any errors that I made, please put those in the comments. I'd love to go over them, and if it really is an error, I'll pin it. So if you went through this and you see pinned comments, go check them out, because it's errors that I made that other people found. So you can go check that out. And I'd like to thank the biggest source I used, the Bible. It's a great piece of literature. For some people, it may seem boring, but trust me, once you actually get into it and think about what it's saying, it truly is interesting. And so many of our modern literary archetypes are actually derived from that. Like, something that may be old and played out for us is brand new when it's introduced in the Bible. So I'd give that a check out and try to look at it with fresh eyes. So besides that, once again, thanks for watching, and bye.